Well, I mean, you've seen the questions that I have, and then I'm a physical person, so I have notes and margins rather than like digital. So I'm just gonna hand you this, and all this is minor and stuff that you know from the email I sent and the questions I asked. I think it's okay to temper kind of some of the contrasts that you're making, because what is successfully being sold globally is like this local artisanal idea of English football.
Right.
It's why like piping in fans when, you know, during lockdown and when play resumed, that mattered to international audiences. So like the players on the field weren't hearing any piped in fan noise or chants or songs, but viewers around the world did.
Right.
And like global, the money, because of the Premier League's globalization, is benefiting everyone who's in the Premier League, because international TV revenue, which, you know, just is massive compared to domestic TV revenue, is shared equally among all the clubs. And like both of these clubs, interestingly, have American owners.
Right.
And they're both NFL. The 49ers bought a stake in Leeds, yeah, and then the Glazer family that owns the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So like the class that you were our guinea pig for when we piloted it last spring, thinking about how to advertise it this time around, it's like, why are Tom Brady and Cristiano Ronaldo essentially teammates? And so I think, but like, that's why the like conceptions of history and memory become even more valuable. Whether or not they're like actually grounded in reality doesn't matter. Fandom is irrational, kind of by definition, which means it's kind of rational too. And so I think there's a playfulness to this without drawing kind of hard lines, that makes it really fun and even more interesting, because it actually is really complex. So I guess that that's like just a question related to that. Or maybe just even something to consider just for the purposes of discussing now. A really interesting like thing to kind of work through is Brexit. And the areas that voted to leave Europe that are dependent on Europeans and people from the world, but especially the labor issues around Brexit now for footballers is fascinating. And so you have clubs that are very dependent, like, you know, for example, well, I mean, if you just look across the entire roster of these clubs, there's going to be majority international players. Leeds does have more English players. So have you, like, and then this Newcastle phenomenon too, where like the fans are ecstatic that, for the most part, I mean, there's fans that are horrified, but the supporters, the kind of stereotypical supporters who just want to win, right, and have lots of money to be able to win, you know, that there's an interest in getting to play with the big timers too. So I guess the point of all my comments is like that the more you kind of start looking more closely, the more complex it is, but that's where history comes in. That's where like authenticity connected to some sort of shared regional identity, you know, generational attachment, all of that is essential to selling English football to the world. And it's why England and the Premier League are like far more ahead of the other European leagues, that learning and studying the NFL model and sort of the understanding that you need to have lots of clubs that are really good instead of just like Madrid and Barcelona or Munich, Bayern Munich. that there's something about creating a league at the top where everybody for the most part is thriving. That's gonna help, but then what you're selling globally is very much local. It's a sort of local thing. That wasn't a question. But how did you kind of reconcile these sorts of like tensions and complications?
So thank you for that question. So this is with like the Brexit tensions, right?
Sure.
So with that specific,
whatever you want to.
right. So certainly with the idea that fans or supporters who are in areas that voted for Brexit, I managed to reconcile it with this idea. So basically the second bullet point. So if you're a person from Leeds or Yorkshire, the broad county, voting for Brexit, what's still very important to consider is that when you're playing in this global league with so many viewers watching and also competing against clubs all across the country, I just think that knowing that this team is there, that represents a place that you either live in or you were brought up in, and in a sense, thinking that it represents you as a person, that can reconcile the potential tensions with this club having a bunch of international players and managers, because essentially they're still all together in an enterprise that represents this fixed place competing against other fixed places. And so that I think is where the tension is reconciled, because being able to have this avenue for being able to showcase your support and showing your identity and potentially thinking that this club is an extension of yourself, that's where that's where I think those tensions can be averted, and there can still be an appreciation for something that relies on European talent abroad.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you.
I do think bringing in Manchester City to kind of explain, because if there's anybody who's modeled and showcased how to sell, understanding that the local matters, that history and tradition matters, that community matters, as a very global brand. I mean, City Football Group, like, they have this model where they own clubs around the world, and that's a way to identify talent, to streamline to the top, but also to just kind of own football globally. But it's owned by the Sheikh of Abu Dhabi, and the thoughtfulness and intentionality his team brought to showing this community they care about community, investing in all sorts of ways to help that community, that gets to the roots of why these clubs were established in the first place. The daughter of a rector of a church founded City Football, Manchester City Football, as a way to help young men who were working to have a sense of community and to have a sort of good place to go with those values and virtues we associate with team sports. And so, and City, I'm sure, is advising the new Saudi ownership of Newcastle, and they've already been talking about how they're going to be investing in one of the most poverty-stricken parts of England, and that this is going to be a boon to community, not just club. That community and club are one and the same.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it's not beyond the scope of this project to maybe just use Manchester City as an example of complicating this kind of contrast. Yeah.
I mean, kind of going off of that, I was I don't know how I missed it, but when you mentioned Manchester City, I looked closer at their badge and I was horrified to realize that they have the red rose of Lancashire still on the crest.
They do, yeah.
Because it's that circular design with the ship, and then I saw the rose and I'm just like, how did I miss it all this time? and that kind of bummed me out, because Man United's crest, as you can see, of course, the ship is there, which I see as close of a local symbol for Manchester as you're going to get on this crest. But obviously, it's just nothing else. And of course, that red devil symbol. I know in my written thesis I couldn't quite pinpoint why that became such a crucial symbol for this club. There was this rumor that this French rugby team, Les Rouges Diables, was nearby in Salford, which is, if I remember my geography correctly, is like almost like a suburb in Manchester. I don't know if I'm referring that correctly, but
right outside.
yeah, and so seeing that myth was interesting to at least find a reason why that red devil became important. But I just think, all in all, probably for the people at the very top, it's important to try to find a symbol where you see it, you know that's Manchester United, and also with their jerseys already being red, and also Red Devil is pretty intimidating, and that becoming the nickname. I think that all beautifully flowed into the overall goal of trying to make this a more sellable brand to people abroad. And I think I also touched on how, with a symbol like the Red Rose of Lancashire, it is rather sad to think about, at least from the Manchester United perspective, how, as they evolved and then they more critically benefited from the globalization that of course all clubs were able to benefit from. But with it being a bit more critical to how the club itself operated, it was a little saddening in a sense to think that this very interesting and great symbol is unfortunately it just has to be left behind because for a person like in Dubai or Sydney or Sao Paulo, you're not going to really understand or care about the significance of a red rose, at least deep dive. It's like, oh yeah, it's there, it's a part of the crest, but I don't know what that means. And so and especially on a fixed plane of being able to show what a club is and represents, being able to just use that space to put a red devil on there, that does the business of being able to sell this brand a lot better. I can understand why they did it. It's just, because when I saw that crest and this kit specifically, I thought this was like one of the most groundbreaking finds of my entire research, because with me being a Manchester United fan for so many years and not seeing this kind of symbolism involved with my club, to see this really surprised me in a good way, because I just kind of thought to myself, how has it come to where we are today, and being able to figure that out was a very great part of my research to be able to finally conclude why that was the case.
Yeah.